Welcome everyone to this insightful session on ramping up charging infrastructure for the light duty vehicle segment in India. So in this section, we'll be exploring on the key challenge of EV adoption, that is the charging infrastructure for the electric vehicles. And I would now invite the key panel to the stage, starting with Sri Mukesh Dadhich, Head Sustainability, Clean Technology and Business Development, BSES Yamuna Power Limited. Sri Awadhesh Kumar, Executive Director, GLIDA. Sri Dilip, Chenoy, India Battery Swapping Association. Sri Omkar, Shaligram, Lead Charging Solutions, TATA.ev. Sri N. Mohan, Head EV Charging Infrastructure, CESL. And Sumati, Kohli, ICCT. So we'll start with a quick presentation, and I'll hand over the mic to Sumati. As we know that charging infrastructure is a very important aspect, and it's often considered as a major barrier of scaling EV adoption, and establishing a network of charging station is vital for the widespread adoption of zero emission vehicles. And studies indicate that nations with higher charge per capita typically experience greater sales of electric vehicles. So that shows the importance of public charging infrastructure. And although home charging is prevalent, access to charging facilities outside home, that is the public charging infrastructure, is critical for encouraging the people to embrace EVs. So in other words, an extensive charging infrastructure is pivotal in facilitating this transition with the government intervention and playing a part in its development. So we did an interesting case study on the state of Haryana, where it is one of the leaders in the industrial growth and infrastructure development. This would mean that urbanization is a very important part of the state. And with over 25 million residents, the state contributed to 3.5% of the EV sales in 2022, but only had 2.9% of India's public charging stations. And the top 16 districts in Haryana hold just 2.7% of the national public EVSE stock. So this shows the potential of a state, how much it can develop, and how important the state should consider charging infrastructure rollout. And the chart on the right side of this slide displays how public chargers are spread currently based on their power rating. And in 4 districts within Haryana, Faridabad, Gurugram, Hisar and Karnal, all with populations exceeding 1.5 million. So we can see that there is a variation in the charging distribution among these districts itself, starting with Gurugram, which stands out, having the maximum number of 7.4 kilowatt chargers, while the other districts which are having similar population, but they fall short of these chargers. Like for example, Faridabad and Karnal is falling short of 42.6% chargers, and Hisar trails behind almost 52.9% as compared to Gurugram. So establishing a network of chargers becomes important, and it demands preparation. And this is important because there is an intricate nature of time commitment involved in it, and the process itself of setting up and making these stations operational over the months, it may take years to underscore the importance of initiating the planning. And often there can be a disconnect between the electricity and the transportation sector, which can lead to a knowledge hindrance, and that can be a hindrance to the transition of electric mobility. So it's important to bridge these gaps through proper communication and collaboration. And a well-developed charging infrastructure not only supports the adoption of EVs, but also reassures the stakeholders about the viability and sustainability. And to ensure the success of such projects, it's important to support the overall ecosystem, including funding mechanisms, the policy support, the stakeholder engagement, to address including the financial challenges and promote widespread adoption. And some of the strategies which has been impactful include government incentives, public-private partnerships, and regulations which require charging stations in a specific place. Basically, these measures are aiming to boost the growth of EV charging networks and ultimately make EV electric vehicles more appealing and practical for the consumers. So globally, we see that the governments are creating policies to speed up the infrastructure development, and they have been using regulations and incentives to fill these charging gaps and make public-private investment more attractive. And utilities are also encouraged to support these zero-emission vehicles by designing favorable rate structures and also promote smart charging. And in India, some of the state policies which are encouraging to see that they stress the need of effective charging infrastructure, and the support of charging infrastructure, which we can see in some of the state EV policies, include no objection certificate for parking spaces, providing public land for charging, and organizing tenders. So these efforts help grow the charging infrastructure market, and they benefit the EV owners. So from 2015 to 2021, we see that there is an increase in the global infrastructure by about 46% annually, while for the light duty vehicle segment, we see that this is almost 53% annually. And at the same time, many countries are setting targets for both EVs and charging stations simultaneously. And among them, China leads in the EV supply equipment, or the EVSE, with over 85% of the world's fastest chargers and about 60% of slow chargers. So public charging infrastructure is, as we said, it's crucial for building the user confidence, especially on the early stages of adoption, because it supports the long trips and provide options for those without home charging. One of the studies that we have done done an interesting projections for basically the zero emission vehicle countries or the ZEV-Tech countries. They support 153 million ZEV vehicles by 2030. So they need around 6 million public chargers. And this chart outlines the required number of public charger requirement in 2030. So they obviously they vary in different markets on how they are going to have an access to private charging. One of the upcoming studies of our team shows that the rising trend of multi-unit dwellings or high-rise apartments, as we call in India, particularly in top 8 cities, where over 50% of the total dwelling units are going to be these high-rise buildings. So that would show the prioritization needed for the deployment of chargers in these particular locations. And similarly, for battery swapping, there is also an interesting use case, in particular the commercial electric two-wheeler, which has a higher daily utilization. In particular, for example, if they have like more than 140 kilometers of daily utilization, battery swapping is one of the very useful economical case as compared to the point charging. And similarly, for electric passenger three-wheelers, use case also battery swapping is economical. So overall, we need sustainable policy support in expanding this charging infrastructure. And I'll stop here and listen to the interesting conversations from the expert. And I'll now hand over to Sumati, who will discuss the ecosystem in more detail.
Thanks, Sunita, for the very insightful presentation. So over the next 1 hour, we will be talking about the topic of how the charging infrastructure for light duty vehicles can be ramped up. In light duty vehicles, we'll majorly be concentrating on two-wheeler, three-wheeler and the passenger car segment. So to begin with, I would like to first invite views from Mr. Awadhesh, who's been at the forefront of developing charging infrastructure. So we have seen that over a period of years, the government has also been supporting the development of charging infrastructure. We had some incentives under FAME 1, under FAME 2, and hopefully the next iteration of the scheme is also going to come out soon. So I just want to understand from you that with respect to the policy landscape, what do you think are the enablers and the barriers for development of a wide network of charging infrastructure?
Good afternoon. So the major policy enabler, I would say, is when the government of India, particularly Ministry of Power, has issued guidelines, I would say, or clarifications in 2018, 13th April 2018, when they made that the charging infrastructure is out of the purview of Electricity Act. So means they made it delicensed, that anybody can set up the charging infrastructure. So this is the biggest enabler which Government of India has done. Rest, I think, post that guidelines, rest, is a history in terms of both PSUs as well as the private sector have joined hand together, and they have created the large infrastructure. And I'll be currently focusing more on the four-wheeler side, because I'm in strong opinion that two-wheeler probably doesn't require a public charging infrastructure. And here we are talking about the public charging infrastructure. And the reason why two-wheeler doesn't require, I'll dwell during the remaining period of the discussions. But then currently, the policy side, another aspect which Government of India also pushed most of the regulators is to have a specific EV tariff. That was again an important element in terms of the enabler, because that has reduced the overall input cost of the electricity, and that will in turn has affected the end price for the end consumer. These are the two major enablers. I have been, everybody probably knows here, or most of the people would be knowing that I'm a strong critic of the government's FAME policies as far as charging is concerned. Because there it's a completely mismatch between what is they want to promote and what they are doing on the charging infrastructure. Say, if you see the FAME 2 carefully, most of the cost or most of the subsidy is going towards two-wheelers and three-wheelers. 1 million two-wheelers, 500,000 three-wheelers, and then around 53,000 buses, right? And only 35,000 cars was to be supported under FAME 2 scheme. And there also 20,000 was the battery electric vehicle and 15,000 was the hybrid vehicles. That was the original scheme of the FAME 2. And there also you had mentioned that it will be only those vehicles will be eligible, those are in the commercial segment, and costing less than 15 lakh rupees. Now, most of those commercial segments would be, at that point of time, with the 15 lakhs, would be mostly Tata Tigor, that kind of vehicles, which has a range at that point of time, around when it was conceptualized in 2019, was around 150 kilometer. Now it has been upgraded to around 200 plus. So mostly those fleets were to be operated within cities. But if you see the charging infrastructure, what they did, they were pushing for a 50 kilowatt chargers, CCS, Shademo, and then also for 100 kilowatt, 200 kilowatt chargers. So you are promoting two-wheelers and three-wheelers on the demand side, and whereas the infrastructure you are creating for the car, that too you are asking that, highways should be connected and all, and where is the vehicle? So there was no vehicle there. And you had removed the private users, the individual buyer from the subsidy scheme. So I think this is the biggest fallacy of the FAME 2, which I hope the government would be able to address in the FAME 3, when they will include the individual owners like you and I, who buys electric car, and they get also benefit under the FAME 3 scheme. I hope the government listen to that one. So that is the biggest, I would say, the challenge. The second challenge, again, I'm a very strong critic of Ministry of Power issuing the guidelines on the charging infrastructure, right? And on the panel, there are colleagues who would be, against these views, which I am holding, and that will be good, interesting perspective to, for you to know, so that we have balanced views of that one. Why I'm saying so? Because what Ministry of Power does, see, many of you might not be knowing, Ministry of Power has no authority as far as Electricity Act is concerned. They simply can't issue any directive to any state distribution companies, right? What they can do, they do issue a guidelines. In the guidelines, they mention that, you should give the electricity within 7 days, 15 days, 20 days. They mention that you have to remove the fixed demand charges. and at the same time, they make certain obligations on the public charge point operator. What happens? Since electricity is primarily a state subject, I would say, though constitutionally it is a concurrent subject, but primarily it is regulated by the state regulators. And what this distribution company does, or supported by the regulator, is that they pick up only those things which is beneficial to them. So what they do, they will ask you that you give me the data, because this is written in the guidelines. I will fix your service fee cap, because Ministry of Power has mentioned that service fee cap would be, regulated. But when it comes to their obligations, that give me the connections at 15 days, they are not. When they ask that fixed demand charges should be kept in abeyance till March 2025. And interestingly, you can see that how state government and the DISCOMs clearly, I would say, don't care for the Ministry of Power, these guidelines as far as their obligation is concerned, is the Ministry of Power issued a consolidated guidelines through the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and where they mentioned that the distribution, this demand charges should be kept in abeyance. Next time, immediately after that, the states which were keeping those fixed demand in abeyance, they started applying the fixed demand charges. And what did you do? Because you can't do anything. So if you can't do anything, if you can't enforce, why you are sending a regulations or a guidelines? It's not a regulation, it's a guidelines, which is helping the distribution company to pick up which is beneficial to them, and not giving the benefit which the guidelines intend to give to the public charge point operator. So this is the biggest, I would say, fallacy. I strongly urge the Ministry of Power that they should stop issuing these guidelines, let the market evolve itself. The second thing, which is again a very great, I would say, blocker, is a conflict of interest. In this country, no one is addressing this conflict of interest. This is a classic example. See, I give you an example of, let's say, Mukesh is here representing BSES Yamuna. Now, he is an exclusive distribution licensee in his jurisdictions, right? Nobody else can go and sell electricity in their jurisdictions. Now, if they are allowed to set up a public charging stations in their jurisdictions, what technically it means? That they know that GLIDA is their competitor, and again, I'm not saying that they will be doing it, but there is a potential that they have an incentive to delay our applications of getting electricity connections, because we are a competitor for them, and they are a regulator kind of thing. So I'm saying that worldwide, the distribution initially, when the US and other country started it, distribution company initially was not allowed. This I can give you the example from the Canada and the New York. They were not allowed initially for 3 years. Because of this reason, it's a conflict of interest. See, if BESCOM wants to set up a charging infrastructure in Bangalore, they have an easy go, because they themselves have to give the connections. They will give the connections to themselves very easily, but not to us. If BESCOM wants to be a CPO, they should come to Delhi and they should operate it here. Then they will get a taste of their own medicine, that how much time the BSES Yamuna takes, how much time Tata Power takes, how much time the BS Rajdhani takes. Or for that matter, they should go to Bihar and Haryana, where the government DISCOM company is there. So then it will be a real level playing field. But currently, government is not creating a level playing field, and that's the biggest blocker, I would say.
Yeah, those were very interesting points, especially the fact about there being a conflict of interest with the distribution companies. And yeah, I think it's probably the best time to get in Mr. Mukesh here from BSES to probably respond to that and also shed some light on how you have been ensuring that development of charging infrastructure and the capacity of the power utility is keeping pace with the future needs.
Yeah, good afternoon all, and thank you to all, and thanks to Awadhesh ji as well, who pointed out or brought to some of the key issues, especially related to MOP and DISCOMs, regulators. So I agree, getting a connection is a pain point in certain cases. So yes, this activity, particular activity of charging was delicensed in 2018, and thereafter some guidelines came from MOP side, with respect to combination of chargers and recently being capping, some sort of capping on the prices and this thing. And it's right that the state regulators are not bound to obey or to take that particular advice or guidelines into their regulations. But I must tell you that before these guidelines with regard to fixed charges or some sort of relief in tariff came from the MOP, Delhi in particular, and there could be many states as well, announced this separate category of EV and provided a very concessional tariff of 4 rupees for a ST consumer, which is much below the average power purchase cost, which is around 6 rupees or 5.5 rupees in Delhi. And also there were no fixed charges, and still even after 5 years there are no fixed charges in Delhi. So it's not like that states are not taking proactive steps for promotion of EV charging especially. The second point is that DISCOMs should not be allowed to compete with. Again,
In their jurisdiction.
yeah.
I'm not saying that they should not. In their jurisdiction.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Maybe once we will expand and you can find that we have good relations with Tata Power, then you can say that same thing. You are getting connection in Tata Power because you have relations there. So I don't think this thing as a competing, rather the whole sector should see this thing as complementing, because traditionally this has been, ultimately it's a cell of electron, and getting an electricity connection is really difficult. I agree to that. While deciding a charging station location, I'm not sure to what extent CPOs analyze the location and other things, how electricity will be brought to that point. We have received many applications. Suppose I can give you an example, the Yamuna Bank metro station, where my network is not in at least 2 kilometers. I don't have any network. That is a floodplain and not allowed, because and metro plans to install charging station there. I have received few applications over flyover on the shoulder. So yes, there are difficulties. The second point here is that it's not like that. Electricity network doesn't have that kind of infinite elasticity. Whenever you will want, we can expand, augment, or lay new cables, install transformers. So there is a limitation, and every new augmentation takes a certain time. That is there. But there are many cases where we have released connections in 15 days as well. There could be certain cases where even we face this difficulty in our license area as well. And we surrendered around 25 number of charging stations, location back to the landowning agency, just because we could not arrange the connection within the time frame. So it's not like that. It is not being done at the cost of other CPUs. So I want to assure at least that we are not delaying. Even any DISCOM is not delaying. I don't believe this argument that DISCOM can delay or have an intention to delay the connection of other CPUs just to gain the benefit of that. It's a complementing exercise. Tomorrow we can say that why should OMCs are installing the charging station? Because they have this land and government has mandated them. MHI has given funding arrangement as well. So they have given mandate that every petrol pump or diesel pump station, even IGL is going on that route always. So they have this ready-made facility, at least on the land part, on connection part as well. They have to simply apply for load enhancement, or they can take separate submitter from the existing meter. But again, should we see this thing as a competing or giving favor, or we should take it as a rapid expansion of charging infrastructure? So I will urge Awadhesh ji and other players that we are only complementing in creating the ecosystem. Tomorrow Mohanji, could be asked a question why ESL is doing. So there is no end to that. There are a lot more government agencies which are doing this job. So for this particular time, I want to end here this thing, and maybe Sumati can ask next question.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting to note that you mentioned that the capacities of discoms also need to be taken into consideration while determining where a charging point can be established, because in a sense you mentioned that there are lines that need to be laid, there need to be transformers. So on that point itself, I'd like to bring in Mr. Omkar, if you could talk a little about how much of a challenge is upstream charging infrastructure in development of charging stations, and if you could also talk a little bit about the economics of it, and in terms of some sort of economic support or financial support if is needed in this segment from the government.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sumati, for this question, and thank you, ICCT, for inviting me and allowing me to share my views. So, first of all, when it comes to location, and we have many EV owners also here, they would reciprocate with this feeling that location of charging station is a very critical aspect in deciding how EV users are going to use the EVs. And if the location is not correct, then you might install charger, you might energize charger, it will be underutilized or not utilized at all, because it all depends on the convenience of the customer. So few of our customers keep talking about range anxiety and all, but one of the customers nicely termed it. It is not a range anxiety, it is family anxiety. When you're on the road and you don't find a charging location at the right place, then you have family with you, you don't know what to do with in that situation. It is not just about finding a charger. So installing a charging station in the right location where people typically take a pit stop is the most crucial thing. And the entire system has to keep this as center point, that this is the focal point, this is where everybody should strive towards. And not just install chargers where it's easy to get connection. So this is first aspect. Second aspect, which is very much linked to this, is, and this is where we had started our journey. When we started in 2019, as Awadhesh rightly mentioned, with Tata Tigor and other cars, there were, almost zero chargers in India, and we had, we had given our, direct intent that we want to build this entire ecosystem together. And we started with obviously launching the right product, which was affordable in the market, accessible to customers. And that is where it started. 2020, when Nexon EV was launched, the EV mobility of personal segment at least started revolutionizing. And that's where, placing the charger location, it is very important for the customer to see the charger first, before adopting EVs, while they will not use the chargers in 90% of the cases. So our data says that 90% of the time user will only use home chargers, only 10% of the times or 7 to 10% of the times they will use public chargers whenever they are outside. But having a charger near your vicinity or near your city gives that confidence that yes, charging infra is growing, and hence it is also important to install the chargers in cities. Now coming to your question of back-end infra in those two situations, in city as well as on highways. So in city, I don't think there is a bigger challenge in getting charging infra, except if the land is very, as Mukesh ji was mentioning, in some places it is difficult to get power, but most of the cases it's manageable to get power. And especially the charger locations where people near in the commercial areas, etc., we can get power easily. But there are few locations. For example, there is a lot of parking in city on road, or lot of parking in open public parking lots. Getting power there and getting connections there is a big challenge. So that's something that has to be dealt. And the bigger challenge is on highways, because highways typically fall under rural grid, and to get a very high speed power or high kilowatt power in those areas, the entire backend infrastructure has to be upgraded. And there are CPOs who have been telling this, that more than the charger cost, they have spent more money on the backend infra cost. And thumb rule says that it is 1.2 or 1.3 times more than the charger cost, especially if you don't have a transformer or grid nearby. So that's a huge burden, and nobody takes that into account when they prepare business cases, think what tariff is, what should be the final end user's tariff. So this aspect is the most crucial aspect. So when it comes to incentivization or what government support would be needed in that is, I don't think like the recent FAME2 guideline did, that they gave that backend infrastructure money to CPOs, which I don't know, instead of giving that to CPOs, they should have given that to DISCOMs, and should have said that whenever a CPO applies for a connection, you put this money in and give them a free of cost connection. That would have made everybody's life easy. Now CPO still has to go through this entire pain of applying, then paying money for backend infra, then claiming it from, yeah. So all of this, if this is streamlined, then the public charging infrastructure growth in India will pick up easily, because now people have realized that chargers should be in the good locations, on highway locations. Now they know how to apply for power. Now it's just matter of accelerating this entire process through incentivization to DISCOMs is what I feel.
Thank you for that very interesting answer. So thus far we have seen that it is one very important challenge is the availability of land, and the other one, like Mr. Omkar was just mentioning, is that the upstream charging infrastructure is very expensive. So I'd like to shift now to a more innovative charging solution, which is battery swapping, which we have seen picking up in the light duty vehicle segment. So Mr. Chenoy, if you could just shed some light on whether the challenges that battery swapping faces, are they same or are they different from the ones that charge point operators are facing? And also we were also talking about the incentives under FAME. So till now battery swapping has been kept out of the scope, and hopefully when the new scheme comes, what are your expectations from that?
Thank you, Sumati. I was wondering when Sunita in her presentation would talk about battery swapping, and thankfully the last slide talked about battery swapping, and she talked about use case in commercial applications. Actually, I think if you look at battery swapping, right, it does 4 things. So imagine if we were to tell all ICE guys 10 years ago that if you want to buy this vehicle, you have to buy 5 years of fuel along with the vehicle. They'll never buy it. We are actually asking the existing vehicle, electric vehicle owners to do the same thing. You buy this, buy the vehicle, the battery along with it, and this is a 3 years kind of thing, so you want to do it. So if you really want to look at reducing the cost of a vehicle, right, first, whether it's a two-wheeler, I will not come to passenger four-wheelers, because the way to buy a passenger four-wheeler is different and people use it for a different use case. But if you look at commercial vehicle, even commercial four-wheelers or light vehicles, battery swapping does 3 things. It reduces the entry cost. Second, the battery that is used as a battery swapping is roughly half the size of the battery that is fixed with a fixed battery vehicle in a commercial vehicle. And therefore, that extra cost, extra weight that you reduce by using battery swapping, you can carry more payload or you can carry more passengers, and therefore it improves the economics of the situation. Battery swapping also, on an average per kilometer traveled, uses less lithium than that. So as a nation also, it is much more, because you don't have to fast charge or charge a battery which is only used up to 40% and then charge it again, which actually deteriorates the battery, etc. going forward. So there are many advantages of battery swapping. Unfortunately, in the initial notification of the Ministry of Power, battery swapping was mentioned. In the later notification, battery swapping is not finding a place. In FAME, as Sumati said, the battery swapping is not finding a place, right? And therefore, all what you need to do is you get to say, okay, whether you're applying for a swapping station or you're going to apply for a charging station, the capital subsidy that you give under whatever the state level programs or the central level program should be equal. It's your choice. You know, Sunita made a very interesting thing about multi-storied facilities. Assuming that multi-storied facility has, 50 houses and each house has got 2 two-wheelers, right? You'll have 100 two-wheelers. Imagine putting 100 charging stations versus putting 4 battery swap stations which has 20 or 30 swapping stations. Look at the economics and look at the equity there. So I think we need to look at it. One of the challenges is when you compare India with other countries, like you did in your slide, the mix of 2 and 3-wheelers first of all don't exist in most of the countries, right? So, we need a special solution for our 3-wheelers. The penetration of 2-wheelers in those countries is a percentage, a single-digit percentage of the number of cars that you have there. But if you look at Taiwan or Indonesia, or look at other countries where the 2-wheeler population is large, then you're seeing swapping actually taking on there. So if you were to say that whether the FAME subsidy or the state subsidies do not distinguish between whether it's a fixed charger or a swapping charger, you bid for the same thing and get the same incentive. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is you have to allow people to register vehicles without a battery. Not all states are enabling that to happen. Policy changes have to happen. I believe it's a very simple thing of getting some one more row in the Vahan portal. You know that better, Omkar, than we're looking at it. So it needs to be done there. The third thing that is required in the case of battery swapping is that you got to, it's actually a long-term incentive for all the discoms. A charging infrastructure can never supply power to the grid. But a swapping infrastructure has batteries there, can actually help you in supplying power to the grid. So a long-term solution in addressing some of the problems that the power sector also faces is good in the case of swapping. And I think we need to get to incentivize the OEs, right? In the same thing, if you're giving an incentive for a swappable vehicle, let the incentive go to the OEs. How the OEs decide to share that with the battery swapping operators, the OE's decision. Today, there is no incentive to the OE. The incentive in the FAME scheme is depending on kilowatt hour. And kilowatt hour, the larger kilowatt hour, I know it's capped, but the larger the kilowatt hour, up to a certain, the more incentive you get. In a swapping battery, the kilowatt hours are actually reduced by nearly 50%, right? Because you can use it differently. So those are, Sumati, some of the points that I would like to make. I'm just saying, while I've listed out the benefits of swapping, and if you want to run a vehicle 24/7, right, swapping is the best, because you just go in and swap the battery and you run, right? Economics, everything works out better, and I think that's the advantages of swapping. There are pilots across the world, but again, you cannot compare them because their vehicle park is different. And I think when you come to, we've done a case study where 37 lakhs of incentive is required for a bus with a fixed battery. If you eliminate the cost of the battery and you put a swapping system in there, you can actually do away with that subsidy. So I think it's time that we all supported swapping, but not at the expense of charging or whatever it is, but let it coexist. Thank you, Sumati, for having me here, and that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you. I think some very interesting points there, especially about the fact that battery swappable vehicles use less lithium. So from a resource sufficiency perspective, this is one of the solutions that could actually make sense. And also the fact that you mentioned that, we need to explore certain business models, right? Like you said, the battery being separate in the bus case. So we have seen certain business models like this, especially in China, where, some business models have come up which have helped in making sure that the entire ecosystem for all the stakeholders, it makes sense, not only for the OEM, but also for the energy service provider, for the person who's running the vehicles. So business models play a key role in making sure that there is a business case. So here I'd like to bring in Mr. Mohan, if from CESL, if he could talk about what are the innovative business models that could be adopted in India, or maybe if there are some learnings from what other countries are doing, so that the economics makes sense not only for one stakeholder but for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Sure, thank you. So thank you ICCT and thank you Sumati, and good afternoon everyone. If you look at the charging business from 2019 till 2024, I think there's a lot of changes with respect to charging technology. And even Omkar said when they launched the first electric car, Tigor, and the Mahindra launched the E-Verito, so they had these Bharat DC connectors. So there was a kind of an impression in the Indian mobility segment that this would remain in long-term charging protocol. And most of the CPOs and even the ministry and the government directed most of the companies to put up more number of charging network. In do so, like we also built up a lot of DC chargers. Largely now after, like if you look at 4 years journey of any CPO, now these chargers are becoming completely like obsolete. The utilization levels are going below 5%. Only like exceptionally like few locations were able to attain more than 13% or 14% or so. So what is a like bigger concern for a business model here? So I think we need to have a long-term strategy where the nation should look at having a common charging standard or connectors. It was a missing link from the beginning. Whenever the government started pushing mobility, they allowed like multiple connector standards. So all the CPOs were rushed to put up multiple connectors, and we also put up like multiple connectors. We put up DC connectors with Bharat standard, we put up Char demo connectors, we put up CCS2 connectors, and also we put up the Bharat AC and maybe Type 2 AC connectors. What has happened in the investment part is concerned? We put up say 5 connectors. If you look at only 2 are earning us a revenue, and rest I think 3 are not generating any revenue for us. There is no fault of CPO has done the investment in the infrastructure. It more towards the lack of clarity in promoting the common standard or connector by the concerned government authorities. But if you look at the part of OEMs also, I think OEM also has a major role here. The OEMs are constantly changing the charger specification. Even if you look at the current Bharat DC connectors, these are compatible with the recently launched TATA Ace electric vehicle. But the earlier Bharat DC connectors had a voltage range of say up to 85 volts. But the recently launched TATA Ace requires say above 100 volts voltage level, which means that even the existing Bharat DC connectors are not able to charge the TATA Ace vehicle, because OEMs are constantly changing the specifications of the electric vehicles, which is making even the existing infrastructure redundant. So this has been a major concern for the CPO operators. Even the OEMs need to have a stronger alliance. But at least like thankfully, I think if you look at the four-wheeler segment, we are seeing a consolidation now. At least most of the electric cars being launched by auto OEMs, they are coming up CCS2 connectors. Now at least we have a clarity that your CPOs need to put up CCS2 connectors, so there is a strong case that OEMs are aligned. So this I think clarity should be there from the auto industry and also from the government side also, that CCS2 would be the preferred standard for electric vehicle. The CPOs can scale up the infrastructure. And coming back to the business model here, see, I think the most CPOs have a different investment arrangement, and we also like do 2 types of investment here. One is the capex investment, where we put up the complete investment in the infrastructure and we operate those EV charging stations. The second model being is we try to partner the charge point operators, and where we enable the land partnership with the charge point operators, and they put up and operate the EV charging stations. The one thing for sure, I think the putting up the upstream infrastructure remains a big interlink between the charge point operator and the required enabling infrastructure here. So if you look at the charging technology, right, even the battery swapping is coming up in a large way, especially in the 2-wheelers and 3-wheeler segment. Right now, I think even the CPOs, we have different classifications. Some CPOs are mainly focused towards putting up the 4-wheeler charging station, and some CPOs are only putting up the slow charging points for 2 and 3-wheelers. And we also have a battery swapping operators for putting up and battery swapping network. So all CPOs are working in silos now. So, but there is an utility infrastructure which remains common for all CPOs. I think it's the right time. I think we should look at co-locating the battery swapping station along the public charging station. Otherwise, like we'll end up building redundant utility infrastructure. Maybe like in down the line, 2 years line, they will be thinking like what we will do with the existing infrastructure. So I think right time, I think we should allow the multiple charging technologies, especially the battery swapping station, which is non-competing with the fast chargers. So I think they can co-locate. So at least the upstream infrastructure which is available at the public location could well be utilized, because the battery swapping will always consume energy, which will yield a higher revenue for the land partners also, rather like putting up a fast charger where the utilization levels are less than 2%. So honestly speaking, I think the utilization levels across all the industry may not be more than say 2.5 to 3%. But largely I think in next like 2 years time, we see the utilization levels may go up to like 4 to 5%, which may at least like trickle major investment in the particular segment. And we see a lot of rollout of these EV charging stations. Nonetheless, there are operational issues when you put up a public charging station, unlike a captive charging station, where there is an anchor customers who gives a minimum guarantee for the charging station. Putting up a public charging station has its own challenges, because there is no clarity on the utilization levels. There is no anchor customers who can bring in the minimum utilization. So the captive, most of the CPUs tend to put up the captive charging station. But personally, my viewpoint is that the captive charging station is not going to resolve the charging need for the customers. Captive can only at least like provide the base charging for the fleet companies, but largely I think the public charging stations have to be strengthened. The current operational issues which a few cities where we operate is majorly with respect to improper use of the chargers, where sensitization is required for the customers, like how to use the public charging station. And I think we should look at like these public assets should not be abused. We have seen like the users throwing the charging guns, at least like leaving those display damages. And also we've seen a lot of tampering and theft issues. I think the industry and even the OEM should look at how the drivers could be sensitized, and how a proper training could be at least like given for those users to use the public charging station. These are, I think, basic kind of an supporting element which is required in the industry, which is presently missing. And largely, I think India should look for a common standard. And largely, I think the OEMs should join hands and agree for a common connectors if they want to scale up this infrastructure by the charge point operators. I think this was my initial views. I think I'll be happy to contribute.
To apologize for each one of you because I have to leave. I told them there. But one thing is that swapping stations should also be classified as public charging infrastructure. You know, because it does the same thing, but it's not at the moment.
So I think battery swapping, I think, has been recognized. If I remember in the recent amendment, the batteries charging station, the battery swapping station has been recognized as a public charging station, and even the EV tariff, which is allowed for public chargers, is being extended to the battery swapping station.
Yeah, only in conjunction with a fixed charger. So you'll see that many swapping stations have a slow charger fixed there, and the swapping station is put there. Anyway, it's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chenoy, for joining us. And yeah, I think the point on co-locating point chargers with battery swapping kiosks is actually something which is very innovative. And ultimately, it could just be left up to the market and the consumer to determine that out of these two charging solutions, what is working best for the consumer. So we were also talking about the need for sensitization of the consumer, some sort of a training on how these chargers are utilized, how to maintain them. So on that, there have been some reports very recently in the news wherein we saw that a lot of the charging stations that have been set up in and around Delhi, in a lot of the prominent places, they are there, but they're not functioning. Either they have some technical issues, or some parts have been stolen, or they're out of maintenance. So on that, Mr. Omkar, if you could just shed some light on how can this issue be resolved, because it takes a lot of investment to set up a charging station, but then ultimately if it is non-operational because of let's say some technical fault or because of some safety related issues, then the entire investment is going waste. So if that can be resolved, so yeah, your views on that.
Hello. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question, Sumati. So I'll also invite Mohan and Awadhesh to comment on this. But my views are on 2 points. One is, see, there are two reasons for which the chargers get tampered with or get vandalized. One is when the user needs it, it doesn't work, and that's an issue which has to be solved. That's something that has to be done by the DISCOMs, the CPOs, and everybody together. Because in most of the cases, when user goes to the charger and if it doesn't work, he is almost at 5% of the charge or 2% of the charge, and he gets really frustrated. And and there is nobody to help him out. He tries calling call centers, he tries doing multiple stuffs there. And see, this is we have to understand that none of us in India are used to filling even fuel in our car. We go to a petrol pump, somebody fills in fuel, and we are just, so there are people who don't even know how fuel is being put, right? So even if you are given a fueling gun and asked to put in fuel, you won't be able to do it. We don't know. And then suddenly we expect people to go to a charger, figure out how to charge the car, how you use a alien machine, use some apps, and and it should just work. And then there are elderly people, there are people who can't read English properly or can't understand technical language. So they get frustrated with such things, and they may end up vandalizing things in that frustration. But that's something definitely should not be supported. But from a CPO side, the reliability, if it is high, I think these issues will be reduced. And second point of vandalism or theft, it is something which has to be actioned upon. We can put in CCTV cameras, we can put in whatever we want. Theft of public, this is a public property. While we may classify it as charge point operators' property and asset belongs to them, but this is a public property, and vandalism of any public property should be condemned, and people should be penalized for this. Only then this theft and other misuses of the chargers are going to be curtailed. But on the reliability and other parts, do you want to add?
Sure. So I think we also learned a hard way because we're operating most of the stations in Delhi and Noida, and we have faced a lot of theft and vandalism issues. So now we are coming up with a different strategy to operate this EV charging station, because we thought initially India would need an unmanned charging station, but if you ask me now, I think India requires a manned charging station. That is what we are going to do now. So we are going to bring in a managed service partner for all our EV charging station, which means the partner will at least operate all our existing EV charging station, and typically we intend to make it as a manned charging station, and this may require some kind of consolidation also, because right now we have put up standalone chargers at multiple locations, which may require a kind of a consolidation by relocating these chargers to a single locations or to few combination of cluster location. So at least these locations could be manned, because unmanned stations will not work in some of the cities like in Delhi and Noida. I think this has to be a manned station. Otherwise, the issues of theft, it's very difficult to control or monitor. And even if you put up a CCTV camera, only the instance could be captured. And perhaps I think the insurance process, maybe coordinating with the police department, enforcement department, would take a longer time. And till that time, we won't be able to keep those chargers down. So if I make a reinvestment in repairing those chargers or getting those gun replacement, again there is no surety that this would remain for next few weeks or so. These instances will reappear. So I think the CPOs has to realign their strategy, and wherever need be, I think we need to go for a manned charging station. That's why I think co-locating some of the battery swapping station makes better sense, because this will bring in a viability also for charge point operators by at least sharing the infra utility with the different CPO segment. We strongly, I think, we come out with a manned service partner. I think the users will be more happy to at least like operate our EV charging station. Once we make it a completely manned stations where people can drive in and get somebody connect the charger and do all those necessary app applications and get their charging completed. This may take a few months for us to do it, but I think we're going to do it in by December or so.
Yep. So I'm not surprised what Mohan is prescribing, because when in 2018 or rather 2017 I was having an interactions with Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power. You know, the first thing, all the PSU company at that point of time who were interested in setting up the public charging infrastructure, NTPC, Power Grid, REIL, ESL was just beginning at that point of time. And all of them were representing to the Ministry of Power that it has to be manned, right? See, the question is that when you talk about any decision like this manned, you need to understand that does it make any economic sense? You are saying that the charger is already underutilized, it is not making commercial viabilities. On top of that, you are adding a layer of a cost which will be least productive. See, if you're in a petrol station, so one person delivers the petrol for thousands of liters in a day. So per unit cost, of the individual salaries is much lesser. Here you will have a 3 shift, 24/7, you will have 4 person. And if I go by Delhi's minimum wage, right, you will have to pay 1 lakh rupees minimum as a salary. And if it is a 3% utilizations, which Mohan is suggesting that, most of the CPOs are doing, probably 5%. If you put that 1 lakh rupees on this 5%, it means the individual end up, the B2C customer will end up paying 4 to 5 rupees per unit extra. Are we in a position to afford that positions? No, not at all. See, the question is that we should, and that, I have been strongly telling that this is a business which has to remain unmanned. It is a digital, and globally it is unmanned, right? The question is that the vandalism, are we issuing this, are we addressing these issues based on the data or based on the narrative? I think it's the narrative. See, has anybody done, and I would say that ICCT should do this one, that you collect the data across the country, whatever public charging stations are there, and how many of them have faced these vandalism issues. If, let's say, one particular city in one particular jurisdictions has issues, it doesn't mean that the entire country is facing that issue. And then you require a policy level directions for that one. So I think these kind of a decision making in today's world has to be data driven, not a narrative driven. So that's my point, as far as vandalism is concerned. But the couple of points I would like to address here, which many of us said. So first of all, I strongly believe that the time has come when Electricity Act should be rewritten, because when it was redrafted in 2003, that was the Electricity Act currently we are following. That has been done primarily from the thermal and hydro, the traditional energy generation's point of view and energy consumption's point of view. Nobody had thought in 2003 that electric vehicle will disrupt the entire chain. Now today you have electric vehicle is a reality, right? This is going to be your one of the major consumers. What are you doing for that one? The regulations point of view. I'll give you 2 examples. One, if you go to the shopping mall, or for that matter, even this habitat center, they are allowed to have, and again, I'm taking an example of Delhi. Delhi, distribution companies are much more progressive, right, compared to the traditional government-owned distribution companies. If you go to Haryana, Bihar, UP, these are traditional government-owned distribution companies. They don't innovate. The one point is the multiple point connections at the same premises. Now, if I want to have, let's say if I go to Bangalore in a shopping mall, I want to have a EV connections. I will not be allowed, because the Electricity Act doesn't allow, or the regulator doesn't allow a multiple point in the same premises, because the shop owner has taken, the mall owner has taken a single point bulk connections. And they become a deemed franchisee, and then they start distributing the electricity. Why don't you allow? And that requires a complete rewriting of the regulations. It can be done by the CRC itself. They can, under the forum of regulators, they can decide, and they can allow it pan-India. That's number one. Some of the states are doing. Delhi government is probably doing that part, but all the states are not doing. Number one. Number two, the LT-HT threshold. All states has a different LT-HT threshold. This was done based on 1948 grid code. Some state has 50 kilowatt power as a LT threshold. Now, you are talking of the EV charging, public charging for cars. Now, car is evolving. The battery, like the Nexon, has evolved from probably 28 kilowatt to now 40, 50 kilowatt. And the capacity which they take is around 30 to 40 kilowatt, at one point of time, or maybe more than that, right? If you talk of the higher end cars like the Kia and the BMWs, they take around 200 kilowatt power. So you require a charger which has to have around 200 kilowatt or 100 kilowatt. So even one charger, if I want to put up, I have to go for ST connections. So why can't, so that's why I'm saying, and they can't do it unless there is a consensus amongst the regulator that we need to increase the threshold of HT or LT for the e-mobility point of view. So the point I'm saying that why this regulation is to be revisited now more from the point of electric vehicles, because this is a reality. So unless we do that one, we'll be always talking about in these conferences and where, but the real structural measures will not be done, and then we will progress like this one only.
Right, right. I think that makes a lot of sense that the regulations and the laws need to evolve as the scenario is also evolving. So we have a last couple of minutes before we close the session. So I'd just like to open the floor if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Yeah, it's rightly mentioned that there are different regulation across different states, and a CPO who is operating at national level have to approach to different state discoms as well. There are two things here. One is related to process, how you apply the connection, different documents required, time taken to release the connection. And second one is the more technical part, which probably Awadhesh is referring STLT kind of thing. So it's a technical matter, and it is designed as per the requirement of a particular discom. Suppose if you ask about Delhi, I don't have that 25 kVA, 40 kVA or 63 kVA transformer in my system, because my system doesn't allow. I cannot put transformer on every pole. Every pole has that kind of load density of 40 kVA, 40 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt kind of thing. We have around 8 gigawatt of load within Delhi. So that's the load density. So I cannot meet this kind of load with small transformer. Now, coming to a different state, Haryana, Rajasthan, or maybe, where we have this agriculture belt and other consumers as well. Even in mid-sized town, barring some state capital, Jaipur or Gurgaon or Chandigarh, 25, 40 or 63, even 100 kVA transformer is sufficient. So that is separated by around 500 meter or 1 kilometer. So it's a system design. You can't challenge that for me put a 1 MVA transformer so that I can increase my load to any time and give me the connection on LT. It's a wastage of money. So it's a technical parameter where the supply is given on ST side and up to what point it will be on the LT side. Here in Delhi, we also see, although there are chances that you will get the supply at LT up to 200 kilowatt. But again, there are certain cases where I cannot give because of overloading of existing transformer or the distance from the existing. I want to avoid that voltage drop problem or many other problems. So there are conditions for that as well. So obviously, we have to honor that technical constraint of the grid. One more suggestion which came from both the speakers, that combining the different kind of charging, battery swapping. So as a grid operator, probably we love any constant kind of load. Grid hates variability or uncertainty. That's for sure. Whether it is solar, there are ways to mitigate the risk, but variability is dangerous for the grid. So a constant life load or predictable load, so that it adds value to my load forecasting and power scheduling as well, is more of a choice, obvious choice for any grid operator, discom, or at Grid India level as well. So combining battery swapping with the charging, which is erratic in load nature, can stabilize or make the whole load some sort of predictable, and it adds into planning as well, load forecasting and power scheduling as well. So, and the second aspect, which is very, very important, wherever there are no fixed charges, we have seen the cases where CPOs are simply reserving the capacity, not allowing other players to take that capacity. Whether he is running 150 kilowatt chargers at a single time simultaneously, he will simply apply for 150 kilowatt and reserve for lifelong. That kind of scenario, although he is allowed to upgrade his load as per whenever it comes. So think about that as well. And also the battery swapping could be used as a source of power back to the grid. Yes, we are doing a couple of pilots around that, and we expect not only this, but also V2G as well for stabilizing the grid. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very interesting insights. We will not have time, very sorry for that, we'll not have time to take questions from the audience because there's another session which has to start here. But audience could definitely catch hold of the speakers outside in the launch, and you can have your discussions. So I'd just like to thank everyone on the stage here for the very insightful discussions that you all gave from different perspectives.